Gilbert and Sullivan refers to the Victorian-era theatrical partnership of the librettist W.S. Gilbert and the composer Arthur Sullivan, and to the works they jointly created. The two men collaborated on 14 comic operas between 1871 and 1896, of which HMS Pinafore, The Pirates of Penzance and The Mikado are among the best known. Gilbert, who wrote the words, created fanciful, topsy-turvy worlds for these operas where each absurdity is taken to its logical conclusion. Fairies rub elbows with British lords. Flirting is a capital offence. Gondoliers ascend to the monarchy, and pirates turn out to be noblemen who have gone wrong. Sullivan, 6 years Gilbert Jr., composed the music, contributing memorable melodies that could convey both humour and pathos. Their operas have enjoyed broad and enduring international success and are still performed frequently throughout the English-speaking world. The operas have also influenced political discourse, literature, film and television, and have been widely parodied and pastiched by humorists. Producer Richard D'Oyly-Carte brought Gilbert and Sullivan together and nurtured their collaboration. He built the Savoy Theatre in 1881 to present their joint works and founded the D'Oyly-Carte Opera Company, which performed and promoted Gilbert and Sullivan's works for over a century. Beginnings. Gilbert before Sullivan. Gilbert was born in London on 18 November 1836. His father, William, was a naval surgeon who later wrote novels and short stories, some of which included illustrations by his son. In 1861, to supplement his income, the younger Gilbert began writing illustrated stories, poems and articles of his own, many of which would later be mined as inspiration for his plays and operas, particularly Gilbert's series of illustrated poems, the Bab Ballads. In the Bab Ballads and his early plays, Gilbert developed a unique topsy-turvy style in which humor was derived by setting up a ridiculous premise and working out its logical consequences, however absurd. Director and playwright Mike Leigh described the Gilbertian style as follows: with great fluidity and freedom, Gilbert continually challenges our natural expectations. First, within the framework of the story, he makes bizarre things happen, and turns the world on its head. Thus the learned judge marries the plaintiff, the soldiers metamorphose into aesthetes, and so on. And nearly every opera is resolved by a deft moving of the goalposts. His genius is to fuse opposites with an imperceptible sleight of hand, to blend the surreal with the real, and the caricature with the natural. In other words, to tell a perfectly outrageous story in a completely deadpan way. Gilbert developed his innovative theories on the art of stage direction, following theatrical reformer Tom Robertson. At the time Gilbert began writing, theatre in Britain was in disrepute. Gilbert helped to reform and elevate the respectability of the theatre, especially beginning with his 6 short family-friendly comic operas, or entertainments, for Thomas Jermin Reed. At a rehearsal for one of these entertainments, ages ago, the composer Frederick Clay introduced Gilbert to his friend, the young composer Arthur Sullivan. 2 years later, Gilbert and Sullivan would write their first work together. Those 2 intervening years continued to shape Gilbert's theatrical style. He continued to write humorous verse, stories and plays, including the comic operas Our Island Home and a sensation novel, and the blank verse comedies The Princess, The Palace of Truth, and Pygmalion and Galatea. Sullivan before Gilbert. Sullivan was born in London on 13 May 1842. His father was a military bandmaster, and by the time Arthur had reached the age of 8, he was proficient with all the instruments in the band. In school he began to compose anthems and songs. In 1856, he received the first Mendelssohn Scholarship and studied at the Royal Academy of Music and then at Leipzig, where he also took up conducting. His graduation piece, completed in 1861, was a suite of incidental music to Shakespeare's The Tempest. Revised and expanded, it was performed at the Crystal Palace in 1862 and was an immediate sensation. He began building a reputation as England's most promising young composer, composing a symphony, a concerto, and several overtures, among them the Overture di Ballio, in 1870. His early major works for the voice included The Mask at Kenilworth, an oratorio, The Prodigal Son, and a dramatic cantata, On Shore and Sea. He composed a ballet, L'Allean Chante, and incidental music for a number of Shakespeare plays. Other early pieces that were praised were his Symphony in E, Concerto for Cello and Orchestra, and Overture in C. These commissions, however, were not sufficient to keep Sullivan afloat. He worked as a church organist and composed numerous hymns, popular songs, and parlor ballads. Sullivan's first foray into comic opera was Cox and Box, written with librettist F. C. Burnand for an informal gathering of friends. Public performance followed, with W. S. Gilbert saying that Sullivan's score is, in many places, of too high a class for the grotesquely absurd plot to which it is wedded. Nonetheless, it proved highly successful, and is still regularly performed today. Sullivan and Burnand's second opera, The Contrabandista, was not as successful.